Do you think the people watching knew that the rules had been written by the two parties?
Oh, of course not. They had no idea. They thought the Commission on Presidential Debates, whose name sounds like a government commission, it sounds like a lovely agency that was commissioned by or chartered by Congress, they thought this organization had decided that these rules best serve the public interest. They had no idea that behind closed doors, leading negotiators handpicked by the candidates were determining that the candidates could not even ask themselves questions.
The Commission is in fact a private corporation, founded by the then chairman of the Republican and Democratic national parties. They are still running the show.
Every 4 years, the Commission on Presidential Debates publishes candidate selection criteria and proposes debate formats in order to comply with federal election law. But questions concerning the debate formats and debate schedule are ultimately resolved behind closed doors between negotiators for the Republican and Democratic nominees.
The candidates need no introduction.
That wasn't the case in the beginning. The first televised presidential debates between Kennedy and Nixon in 1960 were sponsored by the networks. President Lyndon Johnson refused to debate his opponent, Barry Goldwater, in 1964. And the next debate didn't occur until 1976. By then, the nonpartisan League of Women Voters had become the sponsor. In the interest of full disclosure, I have to acknowledge that I was a moderator in 1980, I think probably before you were born. At that time, the debates were under the auspices of the League of Women Voters. And I have to say, thanks to the League, this sort of thing was not happening.
The League of Women Voters was a genuinely nonpartisan organization that fought on behalf of the American people. It took its role as a sponsor seriously. In 1980, when John B. Anderson bolted the Republican Party to run as an independent for the presidency of the United States, the League decided to invite John Anderson to participate in a presidential debate.
Republican John Anderson had served in Congress for almost 20 years before becoming an independent candidate for president.
The man who should be here tonight.
President Jimmy Carter at the time refused to debate Anderson because he thought Anderson would take more votes away from him. So the League was confronted with a dilemma. Does it capitulate to the President of the United States, or does it invite an independent candidate that the American people want to see? Well, the League had guts, and it went forward and invited Anderson to participate in a 1980 presidential debate, even though President Carter refused to show up in front of 50 million viewers.
In 1984, 4 years later, the League had to stand up once again to intimidation from the major party candidates. Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale kept vetoing every journalist the League proposed as a questioner.
The campaigns got together and tried to get rid of all the difficult questions. What did the League do? Well, instead of silently accepting this reality, it held a press conference in Washington, and it lambasted the candidates for, quote, totally abusing the process.
Moderator Barbara Walters was left without a full panel of journalists.
The candidates were given a list of almost 100 qualified journalists from all the media and could agree on only these three fine journalists. As moderator and on behalf of my fellow journalists, I very much regret, as does the League of Women Voters, that this situation has occurred.
So there came this moment when these uppity women at the League of Women Voters said to the presidential candidates, you can't write the rules. And the two parties then did what?
The parties were sick and tired of a women's organization telling their boys who they had to participate with, in what formats, with whom, and what questions would have to be asked.
So the two parties got together.
Michael Dukakis and George H.W. Bush negotiated the first Memoranda of Understanding in 1988. So they handed it to the League. The League said, what is this? We don't do this. We don't put our respected name and trusted name onto a secret document you've negotiated. We refuse to implement it.
The League of Women Voters is announcing today that we have no intention of becoming an accessory to the hoodwinking of the American public. Under these circumstances, the League is withdrawing its sponsorship of the presidential debates.
It's precisely because the League of Women Voters was willing to fight on behalf of the public interest and refused to comply with the secret demands of the Republican Democratic nominees that the parties got together and created their own compliant commission.
And that's how the Commission on Presidential Debates came into being. It has supervised every presidential debate since 1988. But not until the publication of George Farrow's book this year had anyone but a handful of insiders seen the secret contracts for the last three debates, negotiated between the candidates and then handed to the Debate Commission. Those contracts were leaked to Farrow. This is one of those memorandum of understanding that you got.
Yes.
This is the 1996, the agreement, it calls itself. Describe this to me.
It's a binding contract, and this contract dictates who will participate, who will ask the questions, the heights of the podiums, every detail conceivable.
Is the Vice President right?
It's a glorified bipartisan press conference. They get a question from a moderator that they selected and they can predict, they've memorized a response to. They issue the memorized soundbite, which fixes a very nice, perfect 90-second response slot that has been stipulated in the contract. Their opponent cannot challenge their answer because they're prohibited by the contract. The moderator can't challenge their answer because they can't ask follow-up questions. Imagine for a moment if we could have a debate in which the candidates actually responded to each other. That's what a debate is. Okay. Person A makes a statement, person B responds to the statement.
Dictionary Webster, I think it says, calls it a contentious exchange between two parties.
A contentious exchange. Well, I haven't seen a contentious exchange in 17 years since the Commission on Presidential Debates has hosted these forums, because the candidates can't even communicate. This is not a confrontation. And the American people sitting back at home don't know why these candidates can't communicate with each other, don't know why they're just reciting the same memorized sound bites that they're reciting in their 30-second ads, and they're turning off their television sets.
Something else the public didn't know. The secret contracts gave the Republican and Democratic candidates veto power over other participants.
Gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening, Jim.
In 1992, the Republicans believed candidate Ross Perot would hurt Bill Clinton's chances, and the Democrats didn't want to alienate Perot supporters. So the two parties invited the feisty Texan to take part in the debates.
Now, all these fellows with $1,000 suits and alligator shoes running up and down the halls of Congress that make policy now, the lobbyists, the PAC guys, the foreign lobbyists, and what have you, they'll be over there in the Smithsonian, you know, because we're going to get rid of them.
But 4 years later, in 1996, neither side wanted Perot there.
1996 is a wonderful example of what happens when the candidates control the presidential debate process. Bill Clinton, who was the Democratic nominee, and Bob Dole, who was the Republican nominee, hatched a secret agreement to exclude Ross Perot from the presidential debates. Bob Dole desperately wanted Perot excluded because he thought that Perot would take more votes away from him, and Clinton wanted what George Stephanopoulos called a non-event, the smallest possible audience, because he was winning by virtually 20 points in the polls and didn't want anything to shake up the race. So they hatched a secret agreement.
That secret agreement specifically spelled out that only Bill Clinton and Bob Dole would debate, so Ross Perot was left out of